Hello, everyone, and welcome to another True Faces interview for our interview YouTube series. My name is Emily. I'm one of the co-founders, and today I am joined by Catarina, an incredible lady who I'm going to give the floor to just introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Catarina, also known as Blindish Latina, and I'm a public speaker, DEI consultant, and content creator. My focus is primarily disability inclusion in the workplace, but I also really am passionate about accessible, inclusive travel, matcha lattes, and dancing.
I absolutely loved your page. I was so drawn to the different captivating content that you had and everything you were saying. I was so on board with. I was like, yes, I was like, I love this girl as a disability advocate, and seeing all that you're doing. So, would you mind explaining maybe a little further what you actually do on a day-to-day basis and what that looks like?
Definitely. So, first, a little bit about my disability for those who are not familiar with me. I have Usher syndrome, and Usher syndrome is a combination of a vision and hearing disability. So, I wear hearing aids, I got them on. I also have very limited vision. My vision is more like tunnel vision in this little box. And when I'm navigating the world, I use a white cane for blindness. I did not always use that. I started maybe about 6 years ago. So I've been on a whole journey with disability because even though I was born hard of hearing and adjusted to that very well, I found out when I was 17 years old about Usher syndrome and the blindness, which is something that changes. The vision that I had at 17 is not what I have now. So that has caused me to always have to adapt and adjust and figure out what it meant for me to be disabled. So I'm really advocating for the world to adapt to us and to be inclusive instead of us always having to adapt to an inaccessible world. Uh, Back to your question, what do I do every day? I work with companies that want to learn about disability. Maybe they want a speaker for an awareness talk or a fireside chat, a workshop. I do keynotes as well, and I've done several keynotes at conferences, including Access U, the American Foundation for the Blind Leadership Conference last year, and I did one for Deaf Blind UK as well last year. Some of my partnerships are longer term, which is really nice. I get to work with the company on more strategic changes and initiatives that they want to take over time, which is lovely. My topics include things like ableism, inclusive management, language, like what to say, what not to say, how to avoid microaggressions. I also share a lot about my story and intersectionality because my perspective as a disabled Latina woman is something that's really special that I bring. And when I talk about my own stories, I think that's really meaningful for other people. So in terms of day to day, I've got lots of resources. When you're managing a business, you're always updating your website. You have social media content to create, to think about, to put out, to respond to comments. I'm very active on Instagram and LinkedIn. Those are my main platforms. I'm always over there. And on Instagram, I try to share my life. So I do try to show up every day on stories and let people know what does it look like behind the scenes. I'm not the type of person that will say, oh, everything is perfect over here. I do want to share the realities, challenges, frustrations that happen in day-to-day life. And I love that I can reach people in such a direct way. They can just follow and learn.
I
In
love that
terms
you
of
have that different kind of experiential and storytelling piece that comes along with it because it is that lived experience that allows you to be such a good advocate in those different intersectionalities that you mentioned.
yeah, it's something that I really care about, authenticity. And I think that's even my corporate clients, they say to me, we wanted to book with you because you are authentic. We felt like you were relatable. And also disability can make people really uncomfortable. So having someone who can create a space that's welcoming, where people are not afraid to ask a question. That's really important. That's what I try to do.
So you've mentioned it a couple times, the word inclusion and talking about inclusive workspaces and how that can look different for different people. But for you, what does the word inclusion kind of mean?
I love this question because a lot of times we use words and we use them to mean different things. But if we don't talk about what they actually mean for us, then it's just a word. For me, inclusion means that I am cared about and I am thought about ahead of time. Like that is a very simple way that I think about it. Do I have to self advocate, or is something in place already that makes this accessible for me, that considers my needs? And not just my needs, because a lot of times things that relate to accessibility are thought of very narrowly, like captions. Oh, that's for the deaf and hard of hearing. That's not true. Lots of people just love captions, and videos on social media with captions perform better because people will have the sound off, or they just realize that captions help them understand information. There are people with ADHD who benefit from captions, auditory processing disorders, English language learners. There's so many reasons. So I think inclusion means that you're creating a space that is responsive to the varying needs of humans. You're not assuming that everyone who comes in is one way. And a lot of that is rooted in providing flexibility, options, making information accessible in different ways. So when you think about, am I communicating audio only? Is there another way I can provide this information, whether that's visually, whether that's through text? So that's just some of the things that need to be thought about when we think about inclusion.
And especially thinking about it beforehand. I think so often accessibility is such an afterthought where it's like, oh, you speak up about your accommodations and then they change it to fit your needs. Well, why aren't we just altering it in the beginning? And like you mentioned, a bunch of different populations can now access it in a form that might actually better more people than you just think. Maybe having a digital textbook for your offered in your class instead of a paperback will help people who maybe have mobility issues, and carrying around those books is a challenge, or people who like to listen to it instead because they're auditory processors. And I think it extends so much then that potentially narrow thinking about what accessibility even looks like. And so I love that we're just trying to think of it as a whole and before we're planning different things.
Yes, that's super important. And that's what I love to see organizations, companies, individuals doing, just owning. We need to make it accessible. We are going to include that in our whole planning process from the beginning, because it's such a burden to place on people to always speak up, always self-advocate. And that's not right.
I think I can speak for at least part of the disability community when I say that we're really happy that there are advocates like you out there. But obviously, you didn't get to where you are now. Probably you had some challenges. So, what are potentially some challenges that you faced in building your own brand?
One of the biggest challenges, and I think many entrepreneurs will say this, is having boundaries between your life and your business, and also having enough support. Because when you're in a workplace, you have your team members, you have a supervisor that you can use as a sounding board. But when you're an entrepreneur, you really have to figure out, how am I going to make decisions when things are confusing or difficult, or I encounter a problem? What's my plan? When I was working a full-time job and building my business, that left me feeling depleted often, very tired, and you have to be very creative to be a content creator. So sometimes I thought like I didn't have a lot of creative energy. But what kept me going through that period was knowing that I was on a journey and I was growing. I could see my goals coming closer, like I was getting closer to reaching them. I also knew that it was temporary. I wouldn't be doing it forever. And I only did that for a year and 2 months, and then I was able to leave my full-time job.
That's incredible that you were able to do that. Have you faced any challenges in this line of work, or on the other side, benefits or successes with being both a person with a disability and a Latina?
In my personal life, I have noticed that my family, and my family is Cuban and Puerto Rican, there is a lack of dialogue about disability. I think that when I've spoken about this before, people say it resonates for them, but obviously the Latine community is not a monolith. We all have different experiences, but there, in my family, there's some awareness of my disability. They're aware, but it's not necessarily something that they're checking in with me about. And I'm talking about my extended family, not my parents and my brother. It's really that I could show up to a big family party, and I don't really know if anyone in that larger group understands like how to help me, or it feels comfortable to ask me, is there anything we could do to make it accessible? It just hasn't been a conversation. So that's something that I've noticed. Another thing, and one of the reasons that I started doing the work that I'm doing now, is because when I was growing up, I didn't see a lot of voices and women like me being represented. First of all, there's not a lot of disability representation that is done in a way that shows us as fully human, main characters, people that are beautiful and powerful and all the things. So we don't have a lot of that kind of imagery. And then when disability is represented, oftentimes we see white men. And so there's just not as much diversity there. I felt that there was a need for my story and my voice. So when I did start Blindish Latina, I think that I caught people's attention, and that could be one reason that the business is going well, because there was a need for a voice like mine.
I really also resonated with that part about the extended family. It's such a weird in between where they've known you since you were little, and a lot of things I find we don't talk about is the fact that disability changes. It changes throughout a lifespan. If you're have a condition that progresses, some people's it fluctuates day to day. Mine changes based on the setting that I'm in, what's the lighting, what's the contrast. And so having a group of people who know you kind of in and out of your life as you grow up, disabilities change. I learned more about my advocacy, what I needed. So you have this weird group of people who maybe think one way about your disability, and as you go through your life, you kind of have to start changing that perception of maybe what they thought, when you were 7, and, we just gave Emily like a larger set of cards, and that was that. And maybe now you're realizing that you need braille cards. And how do you get that group of people who think, oh, I've known you so long, like, I know what your visual impairment looks like, and you're like, well, no, you don't. And having to almost like re-explain it to this group of people, it's a very weird in between. I love that you get to do a lot of different things in the work that you do, and it has a lot of interesting aspects to it. But what is your favorite part about the work that you get to do?
It's very high level for me. My favorite part is that I get to wake up and do work that I love, that makes a difference in the world, that I'm truly focused on my passion. It's meaningful. Knowing that what I'm doing every day has an impact on others is exactly how I have always wanted to live my life. So as long as I'm in alignment with that, I'm very happy. I know that my mission is to create a more disability inclusive world, and that's what guides me. I also just have a lot of fun in my community. The Stigma Smashers on Instagram are people that I get to talk to all the time. We share conversations and bonds. They're really supportive and warm.
This is kind of an additional question, but do you have kind of one memory or moment that you go back to when you're maybe feeling like things are a little bit tougher and you almost need like a reminder of why you're doing this?
Every post that like resonates with people has a conversation there. So if I'm ever feeling like what I'm doing might not be, I don't know, whatever, I'm having a challenge, I'm having a hard day, I could go in and read those comments. I also have a folder of pictures that I save when someone sends me like a message or lets me know how something impacted them. I have that folder. I know that a bad day is just a bad day. So it usually doesn't continue longer. And what I try to do is give myself grace and try again the next day.
I only ask this because for me, it's the first ever public speaking engagement that Hannah and I did was at our old elementary school. And I always go back to the moment where we got to questions, and I wasn't sure what these like, it's like grade 4 to 8. And I was like, I don't know what these kids are going to ask. I'm going to be ready for anything. And there was this one little boy who stood up in the crowd and he didn't have a question. All he wanted to do was tell us that he was deaf too. He said, Hannah, I'm deaf too. And for me, that's like one of the moments where this little boy had never met anybody who was deaf before. And all of a sudden we were giving him a connection where he knew somebody. He's like, I feel connected to you. And knowing that that's a huge part, like we introduced this kid to other people with disabilities, the disability community. And so for me, that's kind of one that resonates with me. And if I'm kind of feeling like this is really hard, I don't know that I want to keep doing this, that's kind of the one that I go back to where I'm like, this is why I do what I do. A lot with different businesses, and a lot of the time I feel like it can be hard for businesses to maybe know how to get started or what to do, and obviously hiring a disability consultant is a great way to get started. But if you had to give one piece of advice to businesses looking to be more diverse and inclusive, what would it be?
I want leaders to accept that they won't know the true percentage of disabled employees that they have in their workforce, and that they should design for disability inclusion and accessibility anyway. Because I think sometimes businesses focus on accommodations, disclosure, on responding to what they know about in terms of, okay, these employees. But according to data and studies, most people don't disclose in the workplace. And if you stop that from doing the work, then you're going to miss out on a real opportunity to create an inclusive workplace that will benefit all of your employees. So that's really a high level mindset that I want businesses to get, that you need to own it. You need to say, okay, we're going to prioritize disability inclusion, because we know we have tons of employees that are overworking to adapt on their own. And we don't want them to be like that. We want them to thrive, and we want to have their full participation in our workforce. So that's my first thing. If they just want to start learning, if they're with me, they're saying, yes, we're ready, then I think it's so important to begin the learning journey about disability. And a simple place to start, but a very powerful place, is to watch the Crip Camp documentary, watch it on Netflix or on YouTube. That's a great place to start your learning. And then follow disabled creators on all the platforms that you're on, learn from them. And that's just something that anyone can do, because it would be a mistake for a company leader to say, okay, we are going to be guided by our internal disabled employees, and we're going to ask them to lead this on top of their jobs. Maybe it's not even paid. And that's we're going to have
And
them teach us.
not everybody wants to advocate on that level. That may not
Yeah,
even be within somebody's comfort zone. So,
definitely.
and I think understanding that it is a learning journey, I think the biggest thing that a leader can do is acknowledge that you don't know. If you're a leader and you've never lived with a disability, acknowledge that you may not know what that experience is like. You may not know what it's like to live with a disability, and acknowledge that you may not know how to make your company more diverse and inclusive for people with disabilities. Maybe you don't know what that looks like. And I think if you can go out with the mindset of, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn, like, to me, that's everything.
Yes, and there's so many resources out there. I'm sharing tips all the time. I've got my newsletter, I've got a guide on my Instagram, tips for businesses. I already maxed out. You can only put 30 posts in a guide. I just found out. There's so many resources out there, but beginning the learning journey, even letting your team know, I think that's so fabulous too. Saying, I've made a commitment to learn about disability. I'm going to be bringing what I'm learning to our team. I know I'm going to mess up. We can have open dialogue. I'm ready for your feedback. I'm going to just start on this journey.
Okay, and on a lighter note, kind of finally, the thing that drew me to your page, like I said, the content was so good, but the moment I was like, this is somebody we have to interview, is you were teaching us in an Instagram reel how people can turn themselves into GIFs or GIFs or however you want to pronounce it. And I was just absolutely floored because I did not even know that you could do that. What other ways do you have that you've kind of utilized social media to expand your reach and grow your community?
Well, I love that was the reason you wanted to interview me. I made that real because I use those stickers. So on Instagram, they're actually stickers. So if you go to the Giphy, Jiffy, whatever website, you can search, because I have to do the same thing because people pronounce it, I think, the incorrect way, everyone. But then if you pronounce it the correct way, they don't know what you're talking about. So on the website, there is a tab where you can search for gifts or GIFs, which are the boxes there, and then stickers are the other option. And stickers don't have a background. They're like cut out. And that's what's on Instagram stories. So it's kind of like a technical detail. But I got questions about, oh, how'd you do that? On every, I would use them. So every so often I would get a question and I would direct people to the YouTube video where I learned. But then I thought, why don't I just make a reel? And the meantime, people ask me the question, they can just watch it. I can give them that link. And I thought it was really fun. It's one of the things that I did when I was before I was launching my business. I did a bunch of things. I created a speaker reel, a website. I planned a bunch of collabs, Instagram lives, LinkedIn lives, Clubhouse at the time was big. And I wanted these stickers to be ready, and they were. But in terms of what else am I doing on social media? Well, first of all, social media is the reason I have a business today. It is the way that I built my authority on this topic, because my previous career was in nonprofits, education, public health. I never worked in disability. So I was able to change and shift into this area because I started posting all the time, sharing stories, sharing tips, having conversation. I started learning as well from other disabled creators. I love being part of a cross disability community. And that's been really amazing. Let's see, in terms of like what I'm doing on social media, I just try to show up, respond to the comments, respond to the DM. I think that in my stories, I try to give a little bit of a view of my life as an entrepreneur. Like today on my Instagram stories, I opened a mail with my people because I have this mail that piles up and I just don't like to open packages. So I opened it. I showed people what I got. I talked about the fact that I'm building a travel capsule wardrobe. So I can have less clothes when I'm traveling and like rewear the pieces in different ways. So I try to make it something that it's like you're getting a little slice of my life, and we can do a little fun poll, or you can click a sticker and we can talk. I really want it to be a community.
All right. Well, Katarina, that brings us to the end of our interview. I truly enjoyed chatting with you so much today, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I think you made some incredible points that just solidified the entire discussion, and I'm again so thankful for having you.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and we'll see everyone next week. Next time. It's not a week.